I'm Ian S. Campamanes, and this is my reporting about web services. In these slides, these are the related contents about web services. These are web services, what are web services, why web services, need for web services, advantages of web services, reservation of web services, classification of web services, SOAP-based web services overview, advantages of SOAP web services, RESTful web services, advantages of RESTful web services, and SOAP-based web services. These slides talk about the overview of the web services. Web services provide a way to access biz or app logic using Internet Standard Protocols, HTTP, SMTP, FTP. Organizations already have communication, SW, and infrastructure needed to support web services. Early Internet apps, mail, websites help individuals communicate with each other. Web services help applications communicate with each other. Web services allow interoperability across independent processing environments and domains. What are web services? Based on IBM, a web services is an interface that describes a collection of operations that are network accessible through standardized XML messaging. Microsoft XML Web Services expose useful functionality to web users through a standard web protocol, provide a way to describe the interfaces in enough detail to allow a user to build a client application to talk to them, are registered so that potential users can find them easily. In these slides, this explains why we need web services. From business standpoint, integration within an organization between companies, allow time cost efficiency, purchase orders, answering inquiries, processing shipment requests. Do this without locking into a single partner. In these slides, it shows how or the representation of web service architecture. This is the continuation of the web services architecture. The UDDI means Universal Distribution, Discovery, and Integration. And SOAP means Simplest Object Access Protocol. And last, WSDL, Web Service Description Language. Architecture of web services interacts among three roles: registry, service requestor, and service provider, with three operations: find, bind, and publish. All the technologies are XML-based. In these slides, these are requirements or needed for web services. First, distributed computing allows sharing information and processing. Traditional distributed processing models assume common environment or architecture, J2EE or COM. Interoperability is easier to achieve. Distributed processing using different platform architectures and dev languages using is complicated. Interoperability between different systems is key. In these slides, these are the web services advantages. Interaction between different company systems. Interoperation between apps inside the company. Processing is loosely coupled. No need for common application environment. Do not abandon existing investment in software. Add web services front end to existing apps. Big players like Microsoft, IBM, Sun are investing in web services and creating tools to support them. In these slides, these are web services reservation. Web services are not proven technology. Fashionable solution of the day. So, web services rely on XML. XML expands the size of data several times over. More processing is needed to format or parse messages. Internal apps are now exposed to external threats. Web services can expose valuable corporate data, apps, and systems. In these slides, these are web service classification. Web services can be classified in two main kinds: SOAP-based web services and RESTful web services. SOAP-based web services have been around for a while. Google, Blogger, Enterprise Software. RESTful web services are the trendy way for designing web services. Yahoo, Flickr, Delicious as PubSub, Blogliness, and Technology. eBay and Amazon use both REST and SOAP. Let's talk about the overview of SOAP-based web services. SOAP is a protocol for exchanging XML-based messages over computer network. SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. Later, stood for Service-Oriented Architecture Protocol. Provides a basic messaging framework. Successor of XML, PRC, still used for some apps like Blogger. Make use of Internet Transport, HTTP, SMTP. These are advantages of SOAP web services. Easier communication beyond proxies and firewalls than previous remote execution technology. Versatile, allow the use of different transport protocols. Easy to consume, sometimes. Rigid type checking adheres to a contract. Development tools. In these slides, talk about the RESTful web services. REST stands for Representational State Transfer. Collection of net architecture principles that outline how resources are defined and addressed. All resources can be uniquely identified by an URI. No need for additional messages layer like SOAP. An application interacts with a resource by knowing the identifier of the resources, the action required. No need to know if there are cache, proxies, gateways, firewalls, tunnels between client and server. The application needs to understand the format of the information representation returned: HTML, XML, JSON, and images. These slides talk about the advantages of RESTful web services. Lightweight, not a lot extra XML markup, human readable results, improved response time and server loading characteristics, improving server scalability by reducing the need to maintain communication state. Different servers can be used to handle initial and subsequent requests. A single browser can access any resource. Easy to build. No toolkits required. Do not require a separate resource discovery mechanism. In my last slide, let's talk about the SOAP-based web services. Web services are application components. Web services communicate using open protocols. Web services are self-contained and self-describing. Web services can be discovered using UDDI. Web services can be used by other applications because of interoperability. XML is the basis for SOAP web services.
For the XML overview, we all know that XML stands for Extensible Markup Language, a text-based format for expressing structured data such as documents, configuration, books, transactions, invoices, and more. It was adopted from the previous SGML ISO 8879 standard in order to be even more suited for web use. XML and HTML were created with various objectives as follows. XML was created with the intent of transporting data, while HTML was created with the goal of displaying data visually. However, XML tags are not predefined like HTML tags. XML uses a DTD, or document type definition, or schema to describe the data. XML was designed to store, carry, describe, and exchange data. And XML with a DTD is designed to be self-descriptive. Yes, XML makes data exchange easier, transports data more efficiently, makes platform modifications easier, as well as it makes data more accessible. Data can be made available to a variety of reading machines, such as users, computers, voice machines, news feeds, and so on, using XML. And without losing data, XML makes it easy to extend or upgrade to new operating systems, new programs, or new browsers. Next is URI. A uniform resource identifier is a character sequence that specifies a logical or abstract or physical resource that is generally, although not always, linked to the Internet. A URI is a unique identifier for a resource. Internet protocols use URIs to make interactions between and among these resources easier. A URI contains a string of characters that serve as identifiers, such as a scheme name or a file location. The file path in the URI may be empty. The Uniform Resource Locator or URL or web address is the most widely used URI. It is used to find and identify websites and other web-connected resources without confusion. A URI is a short, extensible identifier for the Internet sites. Different forms of resource identifiers can be used in the same context due to the uniformity provided by URIs, regardless of the protocols used to access those resources. The resource identifiers can be utilized in a variety of situations. URIs can be used to identify a variety of resources including electronic documents, web pages, images, and information sources with a consistent purpose. The scheme name is the first element in the URI. Schemes are case-insensitive, and the colon separated them from the rest of the object. The scheme specifies the URI's concrete syntax and associated with protocols. For web services operations, the concept of dynamic service discovery is supported by web services. A service consumer searches a service device for a services they want to use. UDDI or Universal Description, Discovery, and Integration is a web service that provides a standard set of services that enables a web service consumer to dynamically discover and identify a web service description. Web services that offer an API as a set of well-defined SOAP messages are called UDDI registries. To publish and retrieve information about services in the register, the web service provider and web service consumer uses SOAP and HTTP. Web services contact information, business owner information, and technical information about the web service can all be found in public UDDI registries. UDDI allows for two different sorts of conversations. The first one is the UDDI directory is used by the service provider to publish information about the web services it supports. And last, to get a list of web services to match each criteria, the web service consumer sends SOAP formatted XML messages via HTTP to the UDDI directory.
SOAP, or Simple Object Access Protocol, is an XML-based messaging protocol for exchanging information among computers. It provides web service messaging and invocation. It is the second, or let's say the current generation XML protocol, although first generation XML protocols have been and still very useful. Their simplicity and reliance on XML 1.0 still causes some problems. SOAP also takes advantages of XML namespaces and XML schemas. Other terms for SOAP is that it is a simple XML-based protocol to let applications exchange information over HTTP. Along with that is that it is platform and language independent. It allows us to get around firewalls. As you can see in that, it said that SOAP messages must be encoded using XML, must use the SOAP envelope namespace. SOAP message must use the SOAP encoding namespace, must not contain a DTD reference, and must not contain XML processing instructions. In speaking of, first generation XML protocol is based on XML 1.0. Example of this is XML RPC. Short background, it was introduced by Userland in 1998 and uses HTTP as underlying transport. On the other side of the PowerPoint, you can see the example of an XML 1.0. Aside from its reliability, it has also protocol issues. Having that is the extensibility. All protocol architects had to agree for changes. Another is them to avoid with namespaces. Data typing is also an issue, where under single DTTs are limited in use of XML elements. Descriptive nature XML is sacrificed and XML schema is a better solution. Long story short, here is a simple timeline of SOAP history from 1998 to 2001, and said that currently about 80 plus SOAP implementations available, including Apple. Here is the SOAP messaging layer and its simple visual representation, equaled from client to provider. Here is the SOAP message structure. As you can see in the given image, envelope is the core and essential element of every message, which begins and concludes messages with its tags. Header is an optional, determines the specific extra requirements for the message. Having that is an example of authentication. And lastly, the body includes the request and the responses. The SOAP envelope indicates the start and the end of the message so that the receiver knows when an entire message has been received. The SOAP envelope solves the problem of knowing when you are done receiving a message and are ready to process it. The SOAP envelope is therefore basically a packaging mechanism. Of course, it is mandatory since it is the root element in every SOAP message. Given in the slide is an example of a SOAP message. SOAP header is used to pass application-related information that is to be processed by SOAP nodes along the message path. As you can see, all other informations of the SOAP header you can see down below. The SOAP must understand attribute can be used to indicate whether a header entry is mandatory or optional for the recipient to process. It ensures recipients to be aware of important protocol extensions. The SOAP body is a mandatory element that contains the application-defined XML data being exchanged in the SOAP message. The body must be contained within the envelope and must follow any headers that might be defined for the message. The body is defined as a child of the envelope, and the semantics for the body are defined in the associated SOAP schema. All other informations that are related in the SOAP body are listed down below.
SOAP envelope fault. So what is the use of SOAP fault? The use of SOAP fault carries error and status information in the SOAP message. If an error occurs in a web service, a fault message is returned to the client. The basic structure of the fault message is defined in the SOAP specifications. Also, here are the sub-element and the fault code on the SOAP envelope fault. So these are fault code GT, is a code for identifying the fault. The fault string GT is a human-readable explanation of the fault. The fault tractor GT is the information about who caused the fault to happen. The last one is detailed GT. It holds application-specific error information related to the body element. So on the fault code description, these are version mismatch, found an invalid namespace for the SOAP envelope element. Must understand an immediate child element of the header element with must understand attribute set to I. Was not understood. The client, the message was incorrectly formed or contained incorrect information. The last one is server. There was a problem with the server, so the message could not proceed. Data encoding in SOAP, or called SOAP encoding, is an extension of the SOAP framework specification that defines how a data value should be encoded in an XML format. So it provides default encoding schema like simple data types like string and floats, etc. Complex data types like arrays, structs, compound types, data referencing, href, and ID attributes. It's all the binary data has base64 encoding, and it can roll your own schema, encoding style, or interoperability issues. So here in the SOAP protocol binding in the HTTP, as you can see here in the image, provides the out of message context and the in message context. So here are the other SOAP protocol bindings. HTTPS, similar to HTTP, it uses POST. POST is a method used to create new resources, and it is used to create subordinate resources. It returns 200 for success, 500 for failure, plus SOAP fault, SOAP action, HTTP header for hint, MIME data type. So the MIME data type is a media type that indicates the nature and format of a document, file, or assortment of bytes. SMTP stands for Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. It is an application used by mail servers to send, receive, and relay outgoing mail between email senders and receivers. So here is the example of SOAP RPC. It has invocation message and a reply message. So what is RPC? RPC stands for Remote Procedure Call. A message protocol consists of two distinct structures, the call message and the reply message. A client makes a remote procedural call to a network server and receives a reply containing the results of the procedure's execution. So here is the interaction between the service provider, service requester, and the service registry. So let's start in the publish. So publish, when a service registry is used, a service provider publishes its service description in the service registry for the service requester to find. So the next step is find. When the service registry is used, a service requester finds the service description in the registry. The next is bind, or the last one is the service requester uses the service description to bind with the service provider and interact with the web service implementation.
What is WSDL? WSDL stands for Web Service Definition Language. WSDL is defined as writing an XML document that is conforming to the WSDL specs. There are many types of predecessors of WSDL. This includes Cobra IDLS, Network Accessible Service Specification Language, SOAP Contact Language, and it was first submitted to W3C in September on year 2000, and the current version of it is 1.1. WSDL is an XML-based language for describing web services and how you will access them. WSDL is used to describe and locate web services. There is three fundamental properties of WSDL. First is what service does. Operation or method will be provided by the service. Second is how service is accessed, data, format, and protocol details. Lastly is where a service located by address or called URL for details. URL stands for Uniform Resource Locator. For the components of WSDL, there are 5 components. Let's start at types. These are all the data types used by the web service. Second is message, which is a parameter and the message used by method. Third is port type, that each operation of element defines a method signature. Fourth is binding, from the word itself binds, that abstract methods to specific protocols. And lastly is the service, that is a collection of ports. And what is ports? Port is a specific method and its URI. URI stands for Uniform Resource Identifier. It's a character sequence that identify a logical, abstract, or physical resources. WSDL to codes. These are the translator available for converting WSDL documents to code. Example of it is IBMS, WSDK Toolkit, Apache Axis, WSDL2, Java Program, SOAP.py in Python. translator that can be derived from Java classes. Apache WSDL program that has so much works remain to be done. UDDI stands for Universal Description, Discovery, and Integration. It's an API for a base registry, and API stands for Application Program Interface. API is a connection between computer or between computer programs. It is a type of software interface. UDDI was implemented by operator site that replicate each other informations, and it was formally announced in September on year 2000 by a collaboration between IBM, Microsoft, and Ariba that has a community over 310 companies. UDDI registry needs a basic business information. This include name of company, contact information, and location, and etc. It requires to get a classification for the standard industry codes and NA industry code STD. STD is abbreviation for standard. On Service Uniform Resource Identifier, in short, URI, and it describes how a given interface function to allow the computer enforce properties and know that an object of type. A UDDI registry is a directory service where businesses can register and search for a web services. It has a platform of independent framework for describing services, discovering businesses, and integrating businesses service by using the internet. UDDI is using SOAP as a communication for directory of web service and interface described by WSDL, and it helps to find a web service. Web service supports communication among numerous apps with HTML, XML, WSDL, SOAP, and other open standards, and used to search by businesses and search by service type. And there is two types of UDDI registry: public registries that use UDDI specification to publish directory listing of web service. Private registry is useful for organization that needs service-oriented in their system. And for UDDI data structure, business entity is a basic business information used by UDDI for yellow pages. Business service is provided by that businesses for grouping of related businesses, for binding template, service design, and it is the activity of planning organizing a business resource called T-model, where it can access the service. T-model is a technology model that could contain just about anything and a service detail about abstract industry specs and service specs, where it designed to be reusable and can contain pointer to WSDL document. For query pattern, browse has UDDI yellow page that has hierarchy search via standalone or client app. Drill down is a given specific candidate to get all the details. Invocation means the execution of program or function. This is the example of browsing. T-model detail. The T-model definition is stored in business entity construct in binding templates and contain a key T-model key that provides a unique technical fingerprint. The T-models portion of the registry provides the interface for cataloging. The technical model for T-model of web services and T-model definition facilitates that discovery of process by providing meaningful information about a website service including the abstract interface technical specification, for example, binding templates. Associated business allows you to search or reduce the amount of data to be displayed in the monitor based on example on the photo search result listing of businesses. Example of single business. Inquiry API generally accessible. These are the example of parameters in Inquiry API using SOAP to access. SOAP is an important protocol that helps introduce the widespread of web services, also called APIs, based on XML. The SOAP protocol is still in wide usage. Publishing API. Restricted access is a manipulation of data from the business or code that restrict others to manipulate your website. Issue in UDDI. First, on security, there is no global standard. Each operator site must be select or implement by authentication protocol that is still allow publishing. And second is versioning. Number are not used and generic element used in function call. Example of road node in UDDI. The universal description discovery of integration. In short, UDDI specification defines a way to publish and discover information about web services. UDDI registry use the UDDI specification to publish directory listing of services. The overall issue with UDDI is the interoperability. The ability of computer system. UDDI requires software to exchange and make use of information. Web services everywhere, peer-to-peer versus centralized. The peer-to-peer model differs in that all hosts are equally privileged and act as both supplier and consumer of resources such as network bandwidth and computer processing, while centralized, which can be a server through which all data in a network must pass through before the distribution.
As I said earlier, we will talk about what is SOA, or also known as Service-Oriented Architecture. SOA is a software development model that enables services to communicate across different platforms and languages to form applications. A service in SOA is a self-contained unit of software designed to perform a specific task. In every role, SOA has a big role to it. Like in business, it has benefits that can improve your business in terms of decision making, increase the employee's productivity, and the relationship between clients and suppliers, and etc. And implementation, if you implement SOA in every aspect, it has their own benefits that can improve the things that can cover it. A service provider, a requestor, and a service descriptions are all necessary in this architectural style. Modularity, encapsulations, loose coupling, separation of concerns, reuse, compatibility, and single implementation are examples of architectural principles. Patterns and criteria. Programming model, which includes standards, tools, and technologies such as web services. A set of services that a corporation provides to the customers, associates, and other organizational units. Most production web services systems today are not service-oriented architectures. Instead, they are simple remote procedure calls. Remote procedure calls is a software communication protocol that allows one program to request a service from another program on a network without having to understand the network's details. RPC is used to invoke other processes on remote systems, such as a local system, or point-to-point messaging via SOAP or well-structured integration architectures. There are manufacturing service providers, architectures that do not primarily rely on web services. FTP, or a file transfer protocol, is a method of downloading, uploading, and transferring files from one location to another on the internet and between computer systems. FTP allows you to transfer files between computers or over the internet. FTP transfers require users to have an internet connection. Batch files, it aids in the automation of routine tasks that do not require user input or intervention, etc. Asynchronous messaging, for example. Now, let's head on to the benefits of SOA. It is reliable, especially to new businesses process, because it is easy to assemble. Also, it is location independent because it can be accessed using Uniform Resource Locator, also known as URL. It means that they can change their location without disturbing the system. Because SOA allows services to run across multiple platforms, programming languages, and services, service-oriented architecture services operates on different servers within an environment, increasing scalability. Because of it, this is good to support all the major vendors. Data sharing is referred to as interoperability. The easier it is for software programs to exchange information, the more interoperable they are. Non-interoperable software programs must be integrated. As a result, SOA integration can be viewed as a process that facilitates interoperability, and SOA-based application is built by assembling small, self-contained, and loosely coupled functionality services. It enables the reuse of services in multiple applications without interfering with other services. The ability to build applications from reusable components or services rather than rewriting and integrating each new development project allows developers to design applications quickly in response to new business requirements, increasing the agility of SOA. Many familiar project roles are involved in SOA projects, including project manager, business analyst, architect, developer, security specialist, and system and database administrator. Those roles, however, were created for different purposes and may have different inherent meaning depending on the organization's perspective. And for the last discussion about SOA is the limitations of it. They are controlling how the data should be updated, selected, and inserted in a closed application domains, knowing that CAD provides a boundary for security, reliability, and versioning. Also, it has a problem parsing issue in XML, which has a fatal impact on the database. A long-running operation is the one that returns a response with the HTTP status code 202, indicating that the request will be processed asynchronously. WS security is a newer technology which was standardized in 2004. It builds on what has come before. It defines how XML encryption and XML signature apply to SOAP, so that a SOAP message may be encrypted and/or signed. WS transaction is also fixed cost or it is transparent. And because of complex data type interoperability, sharing data is uneasy that may lead to exchanging of information would be difficult. AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That means it's a set of web development techniques that creates a synchronous web application on the client side by utilizing various web technologies. It is also the standard-based presentation using XHTML, or also known as Extensible Hypertext Markup Language. It is a language that bridges the gap between XML and HTML. The World Wide Web Consortium recommends XHTML as a replacement for HTML version 4.0. XHTML version 1.0, also known as HTML 4.01, is an XML 1.0 application that is reformulation of HTML 4.0 and CSS. It also has dynamic display and interaction by means of DOM, or also known as the Document Object Model. It is a web document programming interface. It represents the page so that programs can change the structure, style, and content of the document. The document is represented by the DOM as nodes and objects, allowing programming languages to interact with the page. It is a synchronous server that communicates using XML HTTP requests, is an object-based API whose methods transfer data between a web browser and a web server. The JavaScript environment in the browser provides the object. It is also supported by modern browsers and allows to perform HTTP that returns some form of response. And it can also parse an XML document automatically that was sent in response to a request. JavaScript is the one who binds AJAX together. This also allows exchanging of communication with the web server to send and receive data without even loading a new page. And it reloads the current page. Needs for AJAX. First of all, because of absence of difficulty when using AJAX, they have millions of users that cost less. Second, the traditional web UR are not that responsive to users. So, with AJAX, it gets through in modern browsers that is responsive to users. And websites forcing the users to wait, to submit, and redisplay, but in AJAX, it can send or receive a data without loading a new page because it reloads the current page. AJAX also helps in terms of dynamic and responsive web applications, and it has an ability to communicate to the server asynchronously. AJAX uses JavaScript and DHTML, or also known as Dynamic Hypertext Markup Language, is a set of web development technologies that allows for the creation of dynamically changing websites. Animation, dynamic menus, and text effects can all be found on web pages. HTML, JavaScript, or VBScript, CSS, and the Document Object Model are among the technologies used to immediately update the UI. And when you generate an asynchronous request to server to perform an update or query to the database, AJAX is great with it. AJAX was powered by XML HTTP request JavaScript object. XML HTTP request was originally introduced in IE5, or also known as Internet Explorer 5. It is a graphical web browser, the fifth version of Internet Explorer, the successor to Internet Explorer 4, and the key player in the first browser war. Its distribution methods and Windows integration were at issue in the case of the United States versus Microsoft Corporation that was released in March 18, 1999. AJAX is the one that allows asynchronous requests. XML HTTP requests use JavaScript because when you make a request to the server and process the response, this won't block the user. But before using XML HTTP request, you should create an instance of it. But unfortunately, there is no standard way of doing this. XML HTTP request is the most browser supports. But in Internet Explorer, it is an exception because MS, or also known as Microsoft, is introduced but as an ActiveX object. Examples of uses of AJAX. In the first is when you update your shopping cart, it will dynamically update without clicking the update by the user and wait the server to resend the entire page. Next example is this increase the performance of the site because this reduced the amount of data downloaded from the server. When you update the items on the basket, when the whole page is reloaded, it will download several KB of data forcingly. Using Ajax to calculate the new total, the server can respond with only the new total value, reducing the amount of channel capacity required. Remove the need for page refreshes whenever there is user input. Instead of redrawing the entire page, when a user clicks next on a paginated list, Ajax allows you to simply refresh the list with the server data. Editable data directly in place rather than requiring the user to maneuver to a new page. You can redraw the static table into a table with editable contents when the user click edit. When the user clicks done, you can send an Ajax request to the server and redraw the table with static display only data. In that case, Ajax surely make our life easier.
HTTP Quick Overview. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol and is the foundation of the WWW or the World Wide Web. It is used to load web pages. When we want to browse the web, we can use many types of computers like laptops, tablets, and phones as long as it has browser. When we are opening a web page, notice the URL. It starts with HTTP. That's a signal to the browser that it needs to use HTTP to fetch the document for that URL. Next, the browser looks up IP address. Every single URL on the internet has unique IP addresses assigned to it. The IP address belongs to the computer which hosts the server of the websites we are requesting to access. Once the browser identifies the IP address of the computer hosting the requested URL, it sends an HTTP request. Next step. After the server or host computer receives the HTTP request, it sends box a response. HTTP request. The client's request is an HTTP request, which communicates between the client and the server. HTTP request methods specify the action to perform through the request, and the most common methods are GET and POST. We have the request line. It is the very first line in the HTTP request. The combination of three parts forms it. First is the HTTP method used. One-word command that tells the server what should it do. Second, the path to document the retrieve. The path identifies the resource on the server. And the third one is the HTTP version, showing the HTTP specification to which the client has tried to make the message comply. We have a request header. It is an HTTP header that is used to provide information about the request context so that the server can tailor the response. HTTP response. It is the server's information as a result of the client's request. It acts as an acknowledgement that the performance of the requested action is successful. Passing data in an HTTP request. Append a query string to the URL. It helps to define a specific content or actions based on the data being passed. Each field is represented as name, value. This is paired to the HTTP header. Fields are separated by a character. Each name and value is URL encoded. URL encoded means that the characters are converted into a format that can be transmitted over the internet. Non-alphanumeric characters are replaced by a hex value. Use the POST method. POST is used to send data to the server. For example, is the customer information used in HTML forms, often used with forms on web pages. XML HTTP request object properties. XML HTTP request object can be used to request data from a server. It is a developer's dream because you can update a web page without reloading the page, request and receive data from a server after the page has loaded, send data to the server in the background. Ready state. Property defines the current state or status of the XML HTTP request object. When ready state is equal to 0, it means the request is not initialized. Equal to 1, the request has been set up. Equal to 2, the request has been sent. Equal to 3, the request is in process. And lastly, ready state equal to 4, the request is completed. The status text. It returns a status as a string. For example, 404 means not found and 200 means OK. Response text. It returns the response as a string. Response XML. It returns the response as XML. XML HTTP request object methods. Open. Method URL async username and password. It initializes a newly created request or reinitializes an existing one. It specifies the method, URL, and other operational attributes or requests. The method parameter can have a value get or post or other HTTP methods. The async parameter specifies whether the request should be handled asynchronously or not. Set request header name value. Adds a name value paired to the HTTP header to be sent. Abort. It cancels the current request. Get response header name. It returns the value of the specified HTTP header. Get all response headers. It returns the complete set of HTTP headers as a string. The HTTP request object. HTTP request object is a wrapper for XML HTTP request. Hides browser differences in instantiating the object, and simplifies the process of making a request and obtaining the response. It is defined in HTTP request.js library. The constructor HTTP request creates a new HTTP request instance. The HTTP request object properties. Success callback is the function to be called when a request is successfully completed. Failure callback is the function to be called when a request is unsuccessfully completed. URL. The URL is where to send the request. Query string to be added to the URL. Username used for authentication. It is optional and if required only. Password also used for authentication. Username and password are equivalent to the same name XML HTTP request properties. The HTTP request object methods. Clear request headers. From the word itself, clear. It clear or remove or delete all request headers. Get. This method is used to retrieve data from a server at the specified resource. Requests using get should only retrieve data and should have no reflect on the data. Post data. post method sends the data to the server to create or update a resource. Abort, send request header, get response header, get all response headers. These are equivalent to the same name XML HTTP request methods. RESTful WS or RESTful Web Services. The acronym REST stands for Representational State Transfer. It is one of the type of web services. It is an architectural style, meaning its unique URL represents an individual object of some sort. REST Web Services uses HTTP and supports several HTTP methods such as GET and POST. Most RESTful services uses HTTP as the supporting protocol. Also, REST, it provides communication and connectivity between devices and the internet for API-based tasks. RESTful Web Services pros are lightweight because there is not a lot of extra XML markup. Human readable and easiest to build because there is no toolkits required. Fun fact: the original RESTful architecture was designed by one of the leading authors of HTTP, Roy Fielding. Web services are practically synonymous with XML, the payload or data for communication between the client and the server. However, the application architecture imposed by AJAX and REST techniques has forced many to contemplate alternatives like JSON. JSON has come to the attention of web services providers as a lighter and more friendly format for web services clients in the form of a browser, or what would essentially be an AJAX-enabled application accessing RESTful web services.
So how AJAX and XML works? AJAX and XML works by transporting data, but it is equally common to transport data as plain text or JSON text. AJAX allows web pages to be updated asynchronously by exchanging data with a web server behind the scene.
What is JSON? JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. It is a lightweight data interchange format, and its text form is easy for human to read and write. It is trivial for JS engine to parse and generate. It is based on a subset of JavaScript programming language. And last, JSON is a text form that is completely language independent. JSON is built on two structures: a collection of name or value pair, and an order list value. These are universal data structure. Virtually, all modern programming language supports them. What are the things need to consider between XML and JSON? First to consider is which one to use depends mainly on the WS consumer. Second, the thick WS client like Java, .NET, and PHP should use XML. Third, most programming language environments provide custom libraries, parpraise, or helper classes. Fourth, thin WS clients should consider JSON. Fifth, processing XML can be tough in this environment. And last, programming the DOMs is a difficult undertaking when compared accessing JSON tree. Here are some examples between JSON and XML. As you can see, you can read JSON much better than XML because it is not that complicated to read it. where XML has a lot of symbol and letters. JSON objects. Here are the different kinds of JSON objects. Objects, ID, name, description, type, resource, image, image thumb, element, res, latitude, longitude, and distance. JSON object. An object is an ordered set name or value pair. An object begins with curly bracket and ends with curly bracket. Each name is followed by semicolon and the name or value pair are separated by comma. For example, curly bracket first name colon Juan, comma last name colon Lucero curly bracket. An array is an ordered collection of value. An array begins with bracket and ends up with bracket. Value are separated by comma. Example, bracket, curly bracket, first name Juan, comma, last name Lucero, curly bracket, comma, curly bracket, first name Jose, comma, last name Perez, curly bracket, bracket. JSON value. A value can be string, number, object, array, true or false, and null. JSON string. A string is a collection of 0 or more Unicode characters wrapped in double quotation. A character is represented as a single character string. JSON number. A number is very much like a C or Java number. Octal and hexadecimal format are not used. Benefit of JSON. Easier data access. Some internal representation used by JSON and JS engine for data structure like string, array, and objects. Name access from JSON address.name. Street address access from JSON address book address.street. First phone number access from JSON. Address book address phone number bracket 0 bracket. Here what it looks like when you write it. Lowlights of JSON. Namespace are missing in JSON. As JSON lacks of attribute, creating and validating of JSON may be more complex. XML has several developing tools for its processing. Generating JSON. Use a string builder class to serialize object. Use existing DLLs or library that perform these tasks for different language. This is how it looks like to add a string builder in your code. On JS, use JSON.js from json.org to convert a JSON formatted string into a JSON object. You can see here in the codes.
Mashups, a web application that combines data from more than one source into a single integrated tool, meaning this web application uses data, presentation, or functionality from 2 or more sources to create a new service. Here's the guide to create Mashup Yahoo Maps API. First bullet, obtain an application ID. Next bullet that you see on the screen is the code for the Maps API. Third, add a division container in which to place the map. Fourth, you create a map object and use the draw, zoom, and center method to draw the map. Another guide, mashing up with Yahoo Maps. A reference card for the API is located in its ever IPGP. Place a map centered in -31.422.419, -64.188.183. Place markers for each resource on the map using Y marker, geopoint, add overlay marker. Play with add auto expand method. Next is about JSON/RESTful WS client. WS is located in http://its server IPGT 3655/getLocation_ws.aspx. It shows here the parameters. An HTML template file is in its server IPGT. Use an FTP client to download it locally, modify it, rename it, and upload it to the server, then opening it using IE. JS scripts are also located there. Consume the WS, convert the response to a JSON object, and display the answer in the HTML page. Play a bit. Resources have URL pictures. You can retrieve these pictures from the server too. That's all.